Good evening and welcome to Entelechea. This is our weekly satsang. I'm Dr. Barrier.
And I'm Dr. Tricia Seymour. And tonight we're going to talk about how you live from a space of oneness. That's kind of the beginning of what we're going to talk about today.
We've spent some time over the last few weeks talking about what non-duality is, what oneness is. And as Tricia said, now it's down to the nitty-gritty. How do you live from that space rather than from a space of fear or anger or frustration?
There's a quote that you like by Carlos
Castaneda.
And that is...
And
the quote is...
the spiritual warrior plays the games of life as well as, if not better, than those who believe that's all there is. Pretty clear to the point.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is how do you live the game of life really well? How does it function? How does that work, right?
Yes.
And this is the path of all the ancient teachings. This is the path of inner alchemy. This is the path of waking up even more. So you may already be aware of spirituality. You may already be aware of, things around you that you can't see that seem mystical. Now, how do you go the next step on the game of life? And ascension is the word that we use, and Rusty coined the word.
I like making up words and using words that are real but no one else can pronounce. So ascension is simply the point of, as so many sages have said, be here now, right? Be here now. That is truly ascension. Bring all of who you are to bear in the present moment. You're not going to be worried about what happened in the past. You're not going to worry about what happens in the future. What you're really going to be focused on is all of you here now.
But most people don't want to be here now. They want to leave. They look around at all the strife and stress and politics and war and famine and go, I don't want to be here. Why would I want to be here? I want to ascend. I want to leave. I want to check out. I want to get so high spiritually that I just evolve out of form. But that's not what we teach.
It's not what we teach. It's not even the best way to try to ascend. Right? It's kind of like trying to ascend without having your feet on a solid substance to push off of. 12-step programs has always said you got to hit rock bottom before you can start recovering. Well, there's a reason they say rock bottom. When you're in water and you're sinking, you can paddle and maybe get up, but it's a lot easier once your feet land, once you are grounded, and that is really what ascension is. It is about grounding your spirit, your soul, fully in body. So now you're here. You have the strength to begin to ascend into the higher realms of consciousness.
Well, and what we're talking about is how do you be how is it you can become a divine human? How do you walk on the planet in this form, in the game that we know is illusion, but yet be successful? How do you do it so that the right people and places and things flow well, divine flow? How do you find that? And a lot of that is shifting your paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the world? And how do you see relationships and other people and your own life and your past and your traumas? Those are things that we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks, is all the things that are holding you back from moving to the next level of the game.
And you kind of touched on that earlier when you said people didn't really want to be here because they look at the news and all the that's going on, or the infighting politically, or what's happening in the Ukraine, or global warming, or whatever true disaster du jour they want to serve up to us. Yes, all those things are real. All those things are happening around us all the time. It's your choice whether you want to put your energy to being focused on those, or you want to put your energy being focused on the good you can do, the positive you can do right here, right now. I cannot stop the war in Ukraine, right? I just can't.
I wish I could. I wish maybe I could make all suffering go, all pain and
go
suffering
away.
go away, right?
But that's not possible because that shortchanges everyone else from learning who they are. The fact that I know who I am, that I know who you are, that I know who you are and you are, makes no difference. You have to know who you are. So let's start very simply. You've heard us say this many times. Love is all there is and we're all one. Well, please hear, love is all there is. You have to begin to come from a place in your life of looking at what's going on around you and saying, am I coming from a state of love or fear? And yes, those are really the only two emotional states that you have in your entire life. Lots of feelings.
Lots of things in between, right? Lots of things that fall in those categories. I was going to just read a quick quote by A Course in Miracles. A lot of people have heard of that. It's a great teaching, and we've talked about it before. But it says, teach only love, for that is what you are. So as we mentioned before, I think when a lot of people look at life, they look at struggle and strife and problems, and they see the duality of life. And what we're asking you to do is to move up to the next level and see the unity of life and how things flow together. And, you know, I'm not even talking about lessons or things you need to learn while you're here. We're just talking about seeing it from a different picture. You know, you're standing in the forest, you can see all the trees. When you're in a helicopter, you can see the whole forest. And so we're looking at life at a different angle as we go through the different levels of the game. So love and fear, how is it so simple?
Because it is.
How's that possible? I have all these other emotions. And by the way, feeling your emotions
is important.
Is very important.
We're not asking you to deny anything. As a matter of fact, the happy, smiling people of the world are just basically in denial a lot of the times because they're just thinking, I can't let myself experience the negative. Please experience the negative right along with the positive. Just don't be attached to it.
Well, and I think that's what all the spiritual masters teach about suffering, especially Buddhism. It's not that pain is going away. It's not that you'll never get in another car accident, or you'll never get sick, or you'll never have a problem. Those things still happen. The choice you have is, do you stay in that, identify with that, wallow in that, and not let go of that? Do you become that victim and live from that space? Or can you move beyond that and not have the suffering? So pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional.
So say that again. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Suffering is a mental game, not a physical one. All right, but you ask, how do you have just love and fear when we have all these other feelings that we have? Well, let's look at that. Under love, you have things like acceptance, peace, joy, hope. Keep naming them all, folks, on your own. You got it. Under fear, separation, anxiety, hate, anger. And it's very easy to see. Which one of those do you choose at any moment in your life? It really is up to you to choose. And if you realize that you're angry at the person who just cut you off in traffic, I could choose peace instead of this. They really didn't do it to me on purpose. It was not personal, which is another one of the things that we tend to do when we're in a fear state. It's all personal. It's all about me. When we're in a love state, it's not about me. It's about we. Very clear distinction there.
You had the experience at the Attitudinal Healing Center in Corpus Christi.
Yes.
To have it put in your face how hard it is sometimes to
stay in love.
Stay in a love place when
I did.
Bad things happen. Because it's not always easy. It's kind of the goal.
Tricia wants me to tell these stories because she likes it when I start crying of things that I remember. I'll try to avoid that today. But yes, the year was 1988, I believe, 87, 88. the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic at that point. And I was in Corpus Christi. I was the executive director of the Christie Center for Attitudinal Healing. And the city of Corpus discovered they had a pedophile active in the community who happened to like young men, right? So because I was on the forefront of all of working with catastrophic and terminal illnesses with the center, they said, hey, Rusty, will you be sort of one of the leads to go out and find these young men? So we were walking through the community. He targeted poor minority boys, right? When they popped him, he had in his birthday book over 100 names. All these, he was HIV positive. So basically, he had infected every one of these young men. Right? Well, needless to say, I am human. And I thought of all sorts of wonderful things that could be done to this man for what he had basically giving a death sentence.
Yeah. Well, he was thinking only of himself,
right.
Obviously. And he had a mental illness.
And he had a mental illness, among other things. Mm-hmm. But then I happened to have at that moment an opportunity to go out to San Rafael, California, and spend some time with Dr. Jampolsky at his home center out there. And I was talking to Jerry and kind of ranting and raving about this gentleman, loosely termed gentleman. And Jerry looked at me and in that very loving voice said, so Rusty, how do you see the essence of his being as love? Well, crap. Right, how do I do that? It is not easy to this day. I do understand that in the words many of us grew up with, forgive him. He really didn't know what he was doing. He was only acting out of selfish needs. But what happened from that situation? Corpus Christi was the first city, and really Corpus is 40 years behind anything mostly, but the first city in the state of Texas to have a mayor's commission on AIDS. I was one of the founding members. It brought together the military. It brought together the Catholic Church, the Protestant churches. It brought together all the agencies. It brought the schools out into the open with this. And we began to make changes in that community that benefited everyone. One, it suddenly became safe to talk about the fact that pedophilia existed in the community. It also became safe that we needed to be educating our children about condoms and safe sex and things like that.
And saying no, not coming forward to their parents and not staying in the shadows.
Not hiding. Mm-hmm. It was okay. And I'm going to make a distinction here, folks, because there was a great deal of confusion at that time. Because this pedophile happened to like young boys, it got mixed into being he was homosexual. All right, no. He was a pedophile, folks. There is a difference. All right, it is not together. All right, so there was a lot of education with the bishop of the Catholic Church at that time around this, and lots of, shall we say, vociferous arguments during some of those meetings about what could and couldn't be done. But ultimately, the community came together. We began to do things. We founded the Passage, which was the first AIDS hospice in Corpus Christi. And so many other things came out of this awful, awful situation. I can find the love in what happened from it. I will be honest, while I can see that he's a human and that he's a child of God, it still is very difficult for me to truly see the gentleman who did this as love. But it's there.
Yeah, Mother Teresa, people used to ask her how she did what she did. How could you go to the homeless and the abandoned and the sick and the impoverished and do this all the time in India? And she said, because I see the face of God in everyone I help. I see the beloved. I see in her words, Christ, in everyone that she helped. And so even if it's somebody who is homeless or does something that we really don't like, or that upsets us, to be able to know that inside, even though they may not realize it themselves, and they may be acting out of their own trauma and their own issues, that they still are a part of oneness. Mm-hmm. They are the shadow side of our community, of our world, and that we'd rather not look at and rather not pay attention to.
We'd rather not admit it exists, period.
Yeah, true.
But it does. Right. We do. And that is part of learning to take this walk and walking in oneness, walking in love. It is learning to look at each person you meet. We all do lip service to it. Namaste. The God in me sees the God in you. Well, most times we don't, right? It takes a lot of practice. It takes stepping away from your own ego to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. We were blessed when we lived in Minneapolis to see the Dalai Lama in person.
Us and 3,000 other people.
A large audience, not just us. But we got to see him, and he was an amazing man. And he told a story about a monk who had been in a Chinese prison camp, a very dear friend of his who had been captured, and for years he had been tortured and treated miserably in a prison camp. And the Dalai Lama got word that this monk feared for his life. And so he was so concerned about his friend. And one day he heard that his friend had escaped the prison camp and was on the way to see the Dalai Lama. And the friend, the moment he entered the temple, they rushed him over to meet the Dalai Lama, and they embraced, and they went to a private room to talk. And, of course, Dalai Lama was giving him food. They were giving him food and water, and how are you, and what do you need, and all that. And finally, when the Dalai Lama was sitting with him privately, he asked him, I just have to know, what torture did they do? How awful was the experience that you were afraid for your life? And the monk just looked so confused. He said, I wasn't afraid for my physical life. I didn't worry about dying. He said, during the torture, during the pain, during the suffering, during all those terrible things, I was afraid I would lose my compassion for my captors. I was afraid I would lose my compassion for my captors. Wow. He was able, through his teachings of compassion, to see beyond the torture, beyond the evil deeds that these people, anyone who called them evil deeds, were doing to him. And his only concern was that he stay in a place of love, that he stay connected to Source, that he remembers compassion in every instance. And the Dalai Lama said it just took him aback. He just was like shocked.
He was not afraid that he would die. He was afraid that he would waste a lifetime by losing compassion.
And that's really what we're talking about.
It is.
When we say love is all there is, and we talk about these horrific things that we know happen in life, we tell you it's important to feel your feelings, to work through them, to express your sadness, your anger. We're both psychotherapists. We're never going to tell you to just stuff it down and smile and just walk on. You have to feel it. We talk about the shadow self. You have to feel those emotions and the part of you don't want to face. And then you have to be able to move beyond the pain, so that it doesn't become your identity. You are not your pain. You are not your trauma. You are not your past in this life. You are a God seed. You're a divine human. You are love. Even if sometimes it's hard to see it within yourself and to yourself.
And if you ever wonder, because I know a lot of you out there have been raised as we were in the Christian religion, how we can say that you are gods and goddesses without feeling blasphemous. Well, somewhere in the New Testament, I do vaguely remember, don't know book, chapter, and verse anymore, but there is a statement that says, "Call no man fool, for you are but gods who play the fool." Okay? That was either Paul or Jesus himself that made that statement. Okay? You are gods who play the fool. Remember that we are all part of that one divinity. We are not separate. We are not truly individuals. We appear to be individuals in this game, but we are one. So when I look at someone, at the person in corpus, I do my very best to remember that in spite of all wrapping paper they may wrap themselves in, no matter how awful it looks, they are still God at the very deepest essence of who they are, just as I am. And ultimately, as Neil Donald Walsh said in his book, The Littlest Soul, someone in Oneness had to agree to come play the other side here in Duality. And how great of a gift it is to be willing to sacrifice yourself so completely, to lose yourself so completely that you can play that role. It's easy to play the light, folks. It's always easy to play the light. Put that black hat on, and suddenly we get a little nervous.
Mm-hmm. It's easier for me to read the quotes.
Sure.
So this may be one you've heard before as well. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. That's in the Christian Bible, 1 John 4:18. So what we're saying is fear, or all those negative things that kind of lumped in that category that we call negative emotions. Fear is not the opposite of love. Hear that again. Fear is not the opposite of love. That which is love is all-encompassing. Fear is an illusion, not the opposite. Matter of fact, in psychology, we joke and we call fear false evidence appearing real. So it's an acronym. False evidence appearing real. That's what fear is. So when you have fear, when you feel fear, when you're having those emotions that you don't understand, look at it that way. See if that makes a shift for you. Love is always, love is everything. Love is all-encompassing. And fear is in duality, is the illusion part. It's the illusionary part of the game.
And part of fear, basically, where this all sort of goes back to, is your ego believes it is separate from all that is. And therefore it's fearful that because it has separated itself from all that is, it must have done something wrong. It hasn't. It's just what has to be in place to play here in the game of life.
Right. As we said, the game is duality. The game is right and wrong, good and bad, love and war. It's light and dark. The truth is, light is what there is, and anything other than that is part of the game. Anything other than that is false. And it's, as you move up the spiral, as you move up the levels of the game, you start seeing it, as I mentioned at the beginning, the trees. You no longer see every tree. You now see the whole forest because you're up in a helicopter. And you see everything from a very different vantage point.
Sometimes you're even in the helicopter, a bear chases you up a tree and you get a little higher.
It would be a different vantage point too.
Yeah, it's still a vantage point. It's just about changing your perspective, though, your point of view. And that's really what it takes to live and walk in oneness, in love,
Right.
is to just step back, take a broader view of what's happening, open your heart, recognize that everyone out here is doing the absolute best that they can every day, all the time.
Within their trauma, beyond their trauma, moving on.
Mm-hmm.
And just gratitude is probably one of the best ways to do
Mm-hmm.
that. To stay in a space of love and compassion is to always be grateful for everything that you have, all the things that have come into your life. Notice what you have and be in full gratitude. And that really helps you stay in a compassionate space and in a space of love.
So thank you for joining us once again. I hope you enjoy our videos. If you do, please let us know on our YouTube channel, or comment on them, or share them from our
Or like and
Entelechea
subscribe.
page. Yeah, like and subscribe, whatever. But again, thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.